The hotel receipt fell out of my wife's purse at 7:12 on a Thursday morning, and in 1 second, 12 years of marriage stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like a crime scene. I was standing in our kitchen barefoot, still half asleep, packing away the leftovers from the anniversary dinner that never happened. The ribeye I'd paid too much for sat untouched in a glass container. The candles had burned down to little puddles of wax the night before, and the bottle of Napa Cabernet I'd been saving for months was still breathing on the counter like it had waited longer than I had. Olivia's black leather purse had slipped off the bar stool when I reached for my keys, and when it hit the hardwood, lipstick, a compact, 2 receipts, and a set of car keys scattered across the floor. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Married men spend years telling themselves not to think anything of anything. A late night at work, a turned-over phone, a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. You call it stress. You call it distance. You call it adulthood. You call it anything but what it is. I bent down, picked up the lipstick, the keys, the little white folded slip of paper, and felt my fingers go still. The logo at the top was from the Belmont Grand Hotel downtown. 4-star place. Valet parking. Marble lobby. The kind of hotel where people go when they want their secrets to feel expensive. I opened the receipt and read it once, then again slower, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something harmless if I gave them another shot. Deluxe King Suite. 1 bottle of champagne. Late check-in. 8:43 p.m. Wednesday. The date printed at the top was our anniversary. The same night my wife texted me, "Sorry babe, client dinner ran late. Don't wait up." I remember the exact way the kitchen looked when I read it. Morning light slanting through the blinds. Dust floating in the beam over the sink. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly too loud. My coffee maker clicking to keep the pot warm like the day hadn't just split open. I held that receipt between my thumb and forefinger, and it felt impossibly light for something heavy enough to crush a man's chest. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 41 years old, born and raised in Ohio, and for most of my life I believed in practical things. Mortgage payments, good tires, solid handshakes, showing up when you said you would. I'm a civil engineer by trade, which means I've spent 20 years trusting measurements, load limits, stress points, the hidden truths beneath surfaces. Bridges don't collapse all at once. Houses don't sink in a single day. The damage starts small, usually where nobody's looking. Looking back now, I should have understood my marriage the same way. Olivia used to be the easiest part of my life. 12 years ago, she laughed with her whole face, not just her mouth. She could turn a cheap apartment into a home with a throw blanket and a candle from Target. On our first anniversary, we ate takeout on the floor because we couldn't afford a dining table, and she said someday we'd tell that story in a big kitchen with better light. Last night I stood in that big kitchen alone, staring at 2 plates I'd warmed twice, watching the minutes drag across the microwave clock. At 8:11 she texted. At 9:03 I called and got voicemail. At 10:26 I blew out the candles. At 11:40 I carried the food into the fridge and told myself not to be dramatic. Men my age get good at swallowing disappointment whole. We call it patience. We call it love. We call it being tired. This morning, with that hotel receipt in my hand, all those polite names died at once. Upstairs, I heard the shower turn off. Water pipes rattled in the walls. Olivia was awake. In less than a minute she'd come down those stairs in one of her cream blouses, hair still damp, smelling like expensive shampoo, and the life I thought was still mine. I should have stormed up there. I should have asked the question that was already burning a hole through my throat. But shock doesn't always make a man loud. Sometimes it makes him precise. I folded the receipt once, slid it into my wallet, and picked up the last thing that had fallen from her purse. A valet ticket, stamped with the same hotel name and the same date as our anniversary. That was the moment I stopped being a husband trying to explain things away and became a man who needed the truth, no matter how ugly it looked in daylight. The strange thing about betrayal is that it does not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it shows up as silence in a dining room that was supposed to hold laughter. The night before that receipt landed in my hand, I got home a little after 6 with a florist box on the passenger seat and a bakery bag still warm from the shop on Maple Avenue. I had left work early for once. That alone should tell you how much the evening mattered to me. Men like me do not rearrange deadlines and cancel site calls for no reason. I had made reservations at 7:30 at Bellamy's, The same steakhouse where Olivia and I had celebrated our 5th anniversary when money was tighter and hope was easier. I even wore the navy sport coat she bought me 3 Christmases ago, the one she said made me look less like an engineer and more like a man who remembered to enjoy his life. By 6:15, the kitchen looked the way a marriage is supposed to feel. Flowers in a vase. Plates warming in the oven because I thought maybe we would skip the reservation and stay home instead. Soft jazz low on the speaker by the window. The bottle of wine breathing on the counter. Outside, our street in Columbus looked calm and ordinary, porch lights blinking on one by one, a dog barking 2 houses down, somebody mowing their lawn too late into the evening. Inside, I kept checking the clock the way people check on things they still believe in. At 6:38, I texted her, just heading home. Looking forward to tonight. She answered with a heart and said she was wrapping up one last thing at the office. That should have relaxed me. Instead, even then, something tugged at me. Olivia had become careful with language over the last year. Too careful. She used to text like she talked, fast and warm and slightly messy. Lately, everything sounded polished, trimmed down, free of loose edges. At 7:02, I called. No answer. At 7:10, the restaurant sent a reminder that our table would be held for 15 more minutes. I stood in the foyer with my keys in my hand and listened to the house breathe around me. The air conditioner kicked on. Ice shifted in the freezer. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a car door slammed. At 7:14, my phone lit up. Sorry, babe, client dinner ran late. I am stuck. Do not wait up. I stared at those words longer than I should have, my thumb hovering over the screen like there was a correct response that could save the night from becoming what it already was. I typed no problem, maybe this weekend, then deleted it. I typed everything okay, then deleted that too. In the end, I sent a simple okay. That is the kind of word a man sends when he is trying to be reasonable and feels foolish for wanting more. I loosened my tie, set my keys on the table, and walked back into the kitchen where the candles were still standing there like they had not gotten the message. I told myself client dinners happened. I told myself grown adults miss anniversaries sometimes. I told myself this was not high school, not some dramatic movie, not a reason to read darkness into ordinary disappointment. But disappointment has a texture when it settles in. It makes the room feel bigger than it is. It makes a chair across from you look staged, like a role someone forgot to fill. I poured 1 glass of wine, then another an hour later, and sat at the table we were supposed to share. The flowers leaned slightly toward the window. The food cooled untouched. Her place setting stayed perfect. Mine looked like evidence that someone had tried. Around 9, I carried the steak back to the kitchen and wrapped it in foil. Around 10, I turned the music off because the saxophone suddenly felt embarrassing. Around 10:30, I blew out the candles and watched a thin ribbon of smoke rise into the dark like the evening had finally admitted what it was. When Olivia came home just after 11:30, I heard her heels in the hallway before I saw her. She stepped through the kitchen carrying the faint smell of perfume and night air, smiling that tired, practiced smile people wear when they already know the conversation they do not want to have. She kissed my cheek lightly and said, "I am sorry, it was one of those nights." Her voice was soft, almost believable. I remember looking at her and thinking how strange it was. That a person could be standing 3 feet away and still feel unreachable. I said it was fine. I said we would celebrate another time. She thanked me for understanding, and that word stayed with me long after she went upstairs. Understanding. As if patience were the same thing as not noticing. As if love meant agreeing to be the last man in the room to see what was right in front of him. The next morning should have felt ordinary. Friday, gray light over the subdivision, the coffee maker clicking on at 6, the same commuter traffic building on Grand Avenue, the same quiet routines that make a life feel dependable. Instead, everything in that house felt sharpened, as if the air itself had edges. Olivia came downstairs in a cream blouse and navy slacks, damp hair tucked behind one ear, moving with the smooth efficiency of someone who had already settled back into the role she wanted the world to see. She reached for a travel mug, asked if I wanted more coffee, and smiled in that easy, practiced way that had once felt like home to me. I said yes, because men do strange things when they're trying not to show that their world just shifted overnight. They ask for coffee. They check the weather. They nod at lies like they are hearing harmless small talk. Olivia moved around the kitchen like nothing had happened. That was the part that unsettled me most. Not panic, not guilt, Control. She told me her client dinner had run late, then drifted into a quick complaint about parking downtown and how exhausting the week had been. I watched her as she spoke, not like a husband listening, but like a surveyor checking for cracks in a foundation he had trusted too long. Her voice was steady. Her eyes did not flicker. If I had not held that receipt in my hand less than 10 minutes earlier, I might have believed her all over again. That is the danger of loving someone for years. You do not just trust their words. You trust the familiar rhythm of them. I took my mug and leaned against the counter while she searched her purse for something. For 1 second, I wondered if she would notice anything missing, if her hand would pause where the receipt should have been, if some small expression would betray the truth faster than any confession. But she only pulled out her phone, checked the screen, and slipped it into her coat pocket with the kind of casual movement that told me this was not new to her. This was practiced. That thought sat colder in my chest than the January air outside. I asked which client kept her so late. Not sharply, not accusing, just enough to hear how fast the answer came. She said Weston Biotech. A dinner with 2 executives in from Chicago. The restaurant had been loud, she said. The conversation had dragged. Her assistant had already warned her the account would be a headache. She built the whole thing in seconds, clean and polished, like she had laid the story down in her mind before she even pulled into our driveway the night before. I nodded once and took a sip of coffee I could barely taste. It is funny what details the brain stores when trust begins to die. The gold wedding band on her hand catching the light. The way steam rose from her mug and blurred her face for half a second. The faint sound of a garbage truck somewhere down the street. The smell of toasted wheat bread. Ordinary things. The kind that make betrayal feel even crueler because the world keeps acting normal while your insides do not. Olivia glanced at the clock on the microwave and said she needed to leave in 10 minutes if she wanted to beat traffic. Then she stepped closer, touched my arm lightly, and thanked me again for understanding about the anniversary. That word hit me a second time. Understanding. I looked at her hand on my sleeve and thought about the hotel valet ticket in my wallet, about the sweet charge, about the bottle of champagne billed at $8.56 while I was standing in our kitchen adjusting candles and checking my phone. Some part of me wanted to ask the question right there. Who was with you? Another part wanted to throw every piece of paper onto the counter and watch her explain herself until the lies ran out. But anger would have given her something to fight. Calm gave me something better. Time. I set my mug down and told her it was fine, that work was work, that we would do dinner another night. Relief moved across her face so quickly most people would have missed it. I did not. It was gone in less than a second, replaced by that same polished smile. Then she kissed my cheek, picked up her keys, and headed for the garage. I waited until the door shut and listened to her car start. The engine backed out of the driveway, tires crunching lightly over the frost, and then she was gone. The house fell quiet again, but it was not the same quiet from the night before. This one had purpose. I took out my wallet, laid the receipt and the valet stub side by side on the counter, and studied them like blueprints. The hotel name, the date, the times, the last 4 digits of the card used. Facts do not cry. Facts do not beg. They just sit there and wait for a man to decide what he is willing to see. That morning, standing alone in a kitchen built for 2, I realized I was done trying to protect my feelings from the truth. I wanted the whole thing now, however ugly it looked in daylight, and for the first time since this started, I was not thinking like a wounded husband. I was thinking like an engineer. Verify every load point. Test every surface. Trust nothing that has not been measured. By 9:30 that morning, I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot outside my office, engine off, heat fading, the receipt and valet stub resting on the center console like 2 witnesses waiting to be called. I should have gone inside. I had a project review at 10, 3 bridge drawings to sign, a drainage report due by lunch, and a voicemail from my supervisor asking whether I had seen the revised site measurements from Dayton. Normally, that kind of list would have pulled me into motion. Work had always been the clean part of my life. Concrete either cured or it did not. Steel either held or it failed. Numbers did not flirt with ambiguity. But that Friday morning, all I could think about was the hotel charge and the way Olivia had told that lie over coffee without missing a beat. I unlocked my phone and opened our bank app first. Joint checking. Visa account. Mortgage payment pending Monday. Utility bill posted overnight. Grocery charge from Tuesday. Then I found it. Belmont Grand Hotel. $847.60. Posted at 1:13 that morning. The card ending in 6241. Our shared card. Not hers alone. Ours. I stared at the screen until the numbers stopped looking like money and started looking like intention. A room like that was not an accident. Champagne was not an accident. Valet parking was not an accident. Every part of it required planning, time, choices, and the kind of calm a person only has when they believe they will not get caught. That was the detail that lodged deepest. She had not been reckless. She had been comfortable. I leaned back in the driver's seat and looked through the windshield at the office entrance where people in fleece pullovers and polished boots were walking in with coffee cups and badge lanyards, heading into a day that still made sense. I wanted to be one of them. I wanted my biggest problem to be a design revision or a delayed permit. Instead, I was a 41-year-old husband in a Ford F-150 trying to decide how much of his life had been staged without his knowledge. I thought back over the last year, and suddenly all the small details I had filed under stress or distance started taking on sharper edges. Olivia working later more often. New blouses that still had store folds in the sleeves. Her phone face down on the kitchen island. Saturday mornings when she seemed present in body but already somewhere else in her head. There had been a time when I blamed myself for the cooling between us. I worked long hours. I brought home fatigue instead of charm. I treated consistency like romance and assumed she understood that paying bills on time and keeping promises still counted as love. Maybe part of me had seen the drift and chosen not to name it because naming a thing makes it real. But this was real now. Receipts have a way of ending arguments with yourself. Around 9:40, I did something I am not proud of and still do not regret. I called the Belmont Grand from my truck and asked for accounting. My voice came out steady, calmer than I felt. I told the woman who answered that I was reviewing an expense charge that appeared on my company reimbursement card and needed to confirm the date and room type before filing paperwork. That was not exactly true, but it was close enough to pass. She asked for the last 4 digits and the transaction amount. I gave both. I could hear keyboard clicks, the soft murmur of lobby noise somewhere behind her. Then she came back and confirmed the charge had been made for a deluxe king suite. Check-in Wednesday evening, one-night stay, valet included. I asked whether the reservation had been made under Olivia Carter. A pause. She said she could not provide guest names over the phone. Policy. Fair enough. But then she added, almost casually, that if the cardholder disputed the charge, the hotel would release signed folios directly to the bank for review. Signed folios. Meaning there was a signature somewhere. Meaning paper still existed beyond what had fallen from Olivia's purse. I thanked her, ended the call, and sat there with my hand still wrapped around the phone. That should have been enough, but betrayal changes your appetite. Once the truth begins to surface, you stop wanting comfort and start wanting proof. I opened our family location app next, the one we had set up years ago for convenience and never thought much about again. Olivia had disabled hers sometime in the past month. I remembered because she mentioned her phone battery had been acting up. At the time I had nodded and moved on. Now even that excuse felt neatly placed. I set the phone down and closed my eyes for a second. Not to rest. To think. Rage would have been easier. Rage is hot and simple. What settled over me instead was colder than that. It was the feeling of pieces aligning. The kind engineers know well when a hidden flaw finally explains every crack. By the time I stepped out of my truck and headed for the office, one thing had changed in me for good. I was no longer trying to decide whether Olivia had lied. I was trying to find out how far the lie reached. There are names from the past that should stay buried, but they do not. They wait in the corners of a marriage until the right crack appears. Then they step back in like they never left. Ryan Mercer had been one of those names. The first time Olivia mentioned him again was about 11 months before I found the hotel receipt. We were cleaning up after a neighbor's cookout, standing side by side in our kitchen with paper plates stacked in the sink and the smell of charcoal still hanging in the air. She said she had run into an old friend downtown after work. Then she said his name like it was nothing, like the syllables carried no weight at all. Ryan. Her college boyfriend. The one I had heard about in the soft-edged way married people talk about their old lives, as if the past loses its shape once vows are exchanged and mortgages are signed. Back then, I only knew the broad outline. They dated on and off for almost 3 years. He was charming, restless, hard to pin down. Olivia once called him exciting in the same tone people use for bad, whether they survived in their 20s. Then she met me. Steady job. Clear plans. No games. At least that was the story I had always been told. That night in the kitchen, she said he looked older, fuller in the face, still talked too much, still thought he was the funniest man in any room. She rolled her eyes when she said it, and I remember feeling relieved by that little gesture. Relief can make a man stupid. A month later, his name came up again over Sunday coffee. Their college alumni group had started a group chat. Somebody was planning a reunion weekend in Cincinnati. Olivia laughed at one of his messages and read it aloud like I was supposed to enjoy being included in the harmlessness of it. I smiled, half listening, and went back to reading the sports page on my phone. Marriage teaches you what not to react to. Jealousy looks immature on a grown man, especially when he has no evidence. Only a feeling he cannot justify without sounding small. So I did what a lot of husbands do when a warning light flickers on the dashboard. I told myself it was probably nothing and kept driving. Looking back, I can see the pattern forming in pieces too small to notice if you still want to believe in the person across from you. Olivia began mentioning him just enough to normalize him. Not too much. Never enough to trigger a real conversation. A joke. Here. A passing comment there. Ryan got promoted. Ryan moved back to Columbus after years in Nashville. Ryan still wore leather jackets like he was 23. The details accumulated in our house the way dust gathers on shelves, too thin to alarm you until sunlight hits it from the right angle. Then came the coffee shop story. She said she ran into him again by accident one Wednesday afternoon near her office. They talked for 15 minutes, maybe 20. She said it casually while scrolling through emails on the couch, one leg tucked under her, voice light and almost bored. I asked what he was doing back in town. She shrugged and said consulting, something in commercial real estate, hard to explain, and then she changed the subject before I could ask anything else. That was the first moment something in me paused. Not because she saw him. Cities are small in strange ways. But because Olivia had always been a complete storyteller. When something really was harmless, she gave details freely. Where? Why? Who else was there? What she thought about it. That night, she gave me less than a minute and moved on. Less detail often means more meaning. I know that now. Around Thanksgiving, I noticed her phone lighting up more often in the evenings. Not constantly, just enough. A screen glow on the arm of the couch. A quick smile she did not explain. Her hand turning the phone face down out of habit rather than panic, which somehow felt worse. Panic is clumsy. Habit means the lie has had time to settle into the body. One Saturday in December, we were driving back from Easton after buying gifts for my sister's kids when Olivia laughed at something on her screen and said, "You would not believe what Ryan just sent to the alumni group." She did not show me the message. Maybe that was when I should have asked to see it. Maybe that was when a sharper man would have noticed that her smile was not the broad public one she used with friends. It was smaller than that. Private. Almost protective. But people like me do not like to patrol our own homes looking for danger. We convince ourselves trust is noble, when sometimes it is only fear in nicer clothes. By Christmas, Ryan Mercer had become one of those names that lingered in the edges of our life without ever being invited fully into the room. And now, with a hotel receipt in my wallet and a lie still warm from that morning's coffee, I could feel all those old moments lining up behind me like fence posts on a long road. Separate when you pass them one at a time. Perfectly straight when you turn around and look back. By Friday afternoon, I understood something I wish I had learned years earlier. People do not reveal their betrayal all at once. They reveal it in changes so small you can explain each one away if you are committed to staying blind. Olivia had not become a different person overnight. She had drifted, inch by inch, until the woman in my kitchen that morning looked familiar on the surface and foreign everywhere underneath. I saw it clearly now because once the first lie cracks open, memory starts resorting itself. You stop remembering life as it felt and start remembering it as it was. A few months before all this, Olivia had started dressing differently for work. Nothing dramatic at first. Better heels, new coats, blouses that looked sharper, more expensive, more deliberate. She had always taken care of herself, but this felt less like confidence and more like preparation. There is a difference. Confidence settles. Preparation sharpens. She began taking longer in the mirror before leaving in the morning, not with the relaxed pace of a woman enjoying herself, but with the attention of someone expecting to be seen. I noticed it, of course. Husbands notice more than they admit. We just do not always give ourselves permission to draw the line from observation to suspicion. At the time, I told myself she was going through a phase, trying to feel energized again after a long stretch of routine. I even complimented her once on a camel-colored coat she had bought without mentioning. She smiled and said, "I guess I am trying not to feel invisible." That sentence came back to me later with a sting I could not have predicted. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the ease with which she said them. As if invisibility had become her private justification for anything that followed. Then there was the phone. Not hidden exactly, just handled differently. She used to leave it charging on the counter while she showered or fold laundry with it across the room. Somewhere along the line, it became an extension of her body. Into the bathroom with her. Onto the nightstand screen down. Turned toward her lap whenever a message came in. She started smiling at it in small, sealed-off ways. Not broad laughter. Not anything she would naturally share. A private smile is a kind of locked door. I know that now. There were evenings when we sat on the same couch, a cushion apart, and I could feel the silence changing shape between us. Not peaceful silence. Managed silence. The kind where one person is careful not to look too distracted and the other is trying not to feel foolish for noticing. Olivia also began rewriting our weekends. She used to like slow Saturdays. Coffee on the back patio. A run to the farmer's market. Maybe a movie after dinner. Last fall, she started filling those empty spaces with errands that sounded too vague to question. A work brunch. A quick stop downtown. A lunch with women from the office whose names I never seemed to hear twice. Nothing big enough to challenge on its own. That is the trick. Deception rarely asks for permission in one large request. It survives on 100 small ones. One Saturday in October, I remember asking if she wanted to drive up to Alum Creek and take the trail for an hour before the weather turned colder. She looked up from her phone, hesitated just a beat too long, and said she had already promised to help a co-worker shop for a fundraiser event. I nodded and told her to have fun. Then I spent the afternoon raking leaves in the backyard, watching the wind push them against the fence, telling myself marriage had seasons and mature people did not make trouble over every missed afternoon. What I did not know was that every quiet acceptance from me was teaching her the same lesson. He will not push. He will not look too closely. He will believe what keeps the house calm. Even our conversations changed. Olivia used to ask about my work in real ways. She would remember project names, ask whether the soil report finally came back, whether the county had approved the redesign, whether I was still worried about that drainage issue near Dayton. Lately, she had stopped asking for substance and started asking for shape. How long will this week be? Are you late tomorrow? Will you be home for dinner? Questions less about my life and more about my availability. At the time, I read it as disinterest. Now it looked more like scheduling. That was the ugliest part of all this. The possibility that while I was still trying to be a dependable husband, Olivia had already started organizing her life around my blind spots. By the time 5 o'clock rolled around that Friday, I had barely touched the work on my desk. Drawings sat open on my screen, untouched for 20 minutes at a time, while my mind kept replaying a year's worth of small revisions to our life. New clothes, a guarded phone, vanishing Saturdays, the careful use of my schedule. None of it proved anything by itself, but together they formed a pattern I could no longer dismiss. People talk about betrayal as if the worst part is the moment you find out. It is not. The worst part is realizing how long you were living beside it while calling it something else. At 6:15 that evening, I left the office with the kind of calm that does not come from peace. It comes from decision. The winter sky over Columbus had gone the color of dirty steel, and the parking lot lights were already glowing against the cold. I sat in my truck for a minute before turning the key, not because I was unsure, but because I knew the next move mattered. A man can confront too early and lose the truth in the noise. He can accuse before he understands the shape of the lie, and all that does is hand the other person a chance to rearrange the story. I was done reacting. I wanted facts that could stand on their own. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was on and Olivia's SUV was already in the garage. Through the front window, I could see the soft yellow glow from the kitchen pendant lights, warm and domestic, the kind of scene that would look comforting to anyone standing outside. Inside, it felt like a set. Olivia was at the stove when I walked in, stirring something in a skillet, hair clipped up, one of my old college sweatshirts hanging loose on her shoulders. She turned and smiled like the day had been ordinary. There was a moment, brief but sharp, when I understood how easily a life can split into two versions at once. The visible one with dinner on the stove and a wife asking about your day, and the hidden one with hotel receipts, valet stubs, and lies polished smooth enough to pass over coffee. She asked if I was hungry. I said yes. She asked whether traffic had been bad. I said not really. Then I set my keys down, kissed her lightly on the cheek, and played the role she thought I was still living in. That was the strange part. Once trust breaks, performance becomes easier than honesty. During dinner, she told me about a woman at work who kept rescheduling a client presentation and making everyone miserable. She laughed in the right places. She passed me the salt. She asked whether I would be tied up most of next week because she was thinking about making dinner plans with a friend on Tuesday. I looked at her across the table, at the same face I had memorized over 12 years, and heard the word friend land between us like a coded signal. Maybe that is what betrayal does most efficiently. It turns harmless language into something suspicious. After we ate, Olivia loaded the dishwasher while I dried the few things that had to be washed by hand. Our shoulders nearly touched twice. She hummed under her breath. The kitchen smelled like garlic and lemon soap. Every second of it looked normal enough to make a sane man doubt himself. But doubt had already had its turn with me. Later, when she went upstairs to shower, I moved quietly through the house with my phone in my hand. I checked the front door camera first. We had installed it 2 years earlier after a package got stolen off the porch. I opened the app and scrolled back to the night of our anniversary, pulse steady, thumb moving with the patience of a man inspecting damage after a storm. At 7:21, there she was. Olivia stepping out the front door in a black dress and heels, hair down, coat over one arm. She paused just long enough to lock the door and look at her phone. Not a woman rushing to an emergency client dinner. Not even a woman annoyed about work. She looked composed. Intentional. I replayed the clip twice, then saved it to a private folder. The timestamp sat there in white numbers against the dim porch light, simple and brutal. At 11:34, she returned. Same coat. Same heels. Same controlled expression. She entered with the ease of someone who believed the night had closed behind her cleanly. I stared at the screen until the footage stopped feeling like video and started feeling like testimony. Then I checked our home assistant logs, something I only knew how to do because I had set the whole system up myself. Front door locked at 7:22. No motion in the house until 11:34. The data matched the camera. I did not feel triumph. Only a colder kind of clarity. Up in the bathroom, water ran through the pipes while I stood in the darkened living room holding my phone like it weighed 100 pounds. This was no longer a suspicion fed by hurt feelings. It was a timeline. She left dressed for something that was not work. She returned near midnight. The hotel charge posted after 1. Piece by piece, the story was stripping itself down to the frame. And for the first time since the receipt fell into my hand, I realized I was no longer looking for reasons to spare her. I was building a record because somewhere deep down, I already understood that the man I had been the week before was not coming back. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of pale winter light that makes every room look honest, and that felt almost insulting. Olivia was still asleep when I got out of bed a little after 6. The house was quiet except for the furnace kicking on and the soft ticking of the hallway clock my mother gave us the year we bought the place. I pulled on jeans, grabbed my keys, and left without making coffee. There are mornings when a man goes looking for proof, and then there are mornings when he already knows what he is going to find and just needs to see how much worse the truth can get. I drove downtown through mostly empty streets, past storefronts still dark, traffic lights changing for nobody, the city looking cleaner and lonelier than it ever does in daylight. Bellamy sat on the corner of High and Walnut with its windows reflecting the gray sky, white tablecloths faintly visible inside where the breakfast crew was setting up for the private brunch service they sometimes hosted on weekends. It was the same place where Olivia and I had celebrated our 5th anniversary. Same black awning. Same brass handles on the front doors. Same narrow row of planters along the sidewalk that looked elegant no matter the season. I parked across the street and sat there with the engine idling, staring at it longer than I should have. The night of our anniversary, while I was standing in my own kitchen waiting for her to walk through the door, I had received a fraud alert text from our card provider asking me to verify a charge at Bellamy's at 7:32. At the time, I approved it without thinking because I assumed the reservation system had processed a late fee or some automatic hold from the dinner I had booked for us. I remembered that detail only after I replayed the whole timeline in my head the night before. One charge at Bellamy's, then the hotel. Back then it had seemed like background noise. Now it sounded like a sequence. I got out and crossed the street with my collar turned up against the cold. The hostess was a young woman with a neat ponytail and the kind of bright expression people in hospitality learn to wear before their first cup of coffee. I told her I needed help locating a receipt from Wednesday night because I was sorting out a personal expense issue and wanted to confirm whether a reservation had been used. I expected resistance. Instead, she asked for the last name and tapped at her screen. "Carter," she said after a second, and my stomach tightened even though I already knew it would. "Party of 2 at 7:30. I kept my face still and said yes, that sounded right. Then I asked if the reservation had been canceled or closed out. She frowned slightly and turned the monitor a little toward herself. "No," she said, "it shows seated at 7:36 and closed at 8:12. 2 guests. 1 bottle of Pinot Noir by the glass and an appetizer." I thanked her, told her that was all I needed, and walked back outside before my expression could say too much. The cold hit harder on the sidewalk than it had crossing over. I stood beside my truck with one hand on the door and looked back at the restaurant windows. Bellamy's. Our place. Not because it was the fanciest restaurant in Columbus or because it meant much to anybody else, but because it meant something to us. Or I had thought it did. Olivia had not just lied about where she spent our anniversary night. She had started it at the exact restaurant where I had planned to celebrate with her. That was the moment the betrayal changed shape for me. Until then, some part of my mind had still been trying to classify this as cheating in the broad, ugly, impersonal sense. A lie, a hotel room, a hidden meeting. Painful enough. But this was more specific than that. More deliberate. She had stepped into a place tied to our life, our memories, our private language as a couple, and used it as the opening act for a night she thought I would never be able to trace. That detail landed differently. It was not just disloyalty. It was contempt dressed up in familiarity. I sat in the truck afterward without turning the engine on, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching my breath cloud the windshield. 12 years of marriage teaches you what matters to the person you love. Their favorite wine. The restaurant where they first cried happy tears. The song they want played at parties. The stories they repeat because they like the way you remember them too. Olivia knew exactly what Bellamy's meant. That was why she chose it, or at the very least why she did not avoid it. Either option carried the same kind of message. I am doing this anyway. Back at home, she was probably still in bed under the white comforter we picked out together at Macy's 3 winters ago, sleeping in the quiet of a house paid for by routine, trust, and the dull, dependable love she no longer seemed to value. I sat there another minute and understood with a cold kind of certainty that the deepest wound was no longer the lie itself. It was the carelessness with which she had stepped across the things I thought were sacred. And once a man sees that, really sees it, something inside him stops begging the truth to be gentler than it is. By the time I drove home from downtown, the city had started filling with the flat, colorless light of late Saturday morning. But inside me, everything felt darker and more exact. There are discoveries that shatter you, and then there are discoveries that rearrange your entire memory of a life. Bellamy's had done that to me. I pulled into the driveway just after 9 and sat there for a moment with the engine off, looking at the house Olivia and I had bought 8 years earlier, the white trim, the narrow front porch, the winter-dead hydrangeas lining the walkway. From the outside, it still looked like the kind of place people pointed to when they talked about stability. 2 decent incomes. Clean yard. Good neighborhood. No raised voices drifting through the windows. But houses keep secrets as well as people do. When I walked in, the smell of coffee met me before I saw her. Olivia was standing at the island in leggings and one of those oversized cream sweaters she wore on slow weekends, one hand wrapped around a mug, the other scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled like we were still a couple having an ordinary Saturday. Asked where I had gone so early. I told her I could not sleep and took a drive. That was true enough to pass. She nodded, set her phone face down, and asked if I wanted eggs. There was a time when that little gesture would have hit me as care. That morning it felt like camouflage. I told her no thanks and poured myself coffee I did not want. We stood in the same kitchen again. Only now I carried the full weight of what Bellamy's meant, and somehow that made even the small domestic things between us feel staged. The white ceramic mugs. The bowl of clementines on the counter. The grocery list clipped to the fridge. I used to think betrayal announced itself with chaos. I was learning that it can wear slippers and ask whether you need anything from Target. Olivia chatted for a minute about a friend from work who might be getting divorced, then shifted into a story about a candle sale at the mall. I barely heard her. My mind had gone backward instead, to a different version of us, one I had spent too long protecting. There was a winter 12 years ago when Olivia lost her job 3 weeks before Christmas. The marketing firm she worked for folded with almost no warning. One week she was complaining about a client in Indianapolis, and the next she was carrying a cardboard box out to her car with a fake smile and a severance packet. We had only been married 4 months. Our apartment was 600 square feet above a dentist's office in Worthington, with rattling heat and windows that leaked cold air around the frame. I was making $48,000 a year then and still paying off student loans, but I remember telling her we would be fine before she even finished crying. Not because I was certain, because that is what husbands are supposed to do when the floor gives way beneath the person they love. For 6 months, I picked up every extra hour I could get. I took on side drafting work at night for a contractor in Dublin. I skipped lunches out, drove the same truck with a heater that only worked on high, and sold a set of golf clubs my father gave me after college because we needed room in the checking account more than I needed a hobby. Olivia used to stand at the stove in that little apartment and apologize for becoming a burden, and every time she did I told her the same thing. You are my wife. This is what it means. We survive things together. I did not say that to sound noble. It was just true. That was the agreement I thought we were both living under. Later, when she finally landed a better job and we moved into a townhome, and then this house, that story became one of our favorite origin myths. The hard winter, the lean beginning, the proof that we had built something real. She used to tell friends that I held the whole thing together when she thought she was falling apart. I heard her say it more than once with her hand resting on my arm, voice warm with pride. That is the memory that came back to me in the kitchen that Saturday morning while she sipped coffee and talked about candles like her voice had not been lying to me for days, maybe months, maybe longer. The affair, if that is what it had fully become, was one kind of betrayal. But the deeper one was harder to explain. It was the possibility that everything I had carried for us in those early years, every sacrifice made quietly and without scorekeeping, had been filed away in her mind as temporary usefulness instead of lasting loyalty. That possibility hurt in a different register. Less dramatic, more final. Because if a person can take your steadiness in their worst season and still treat your trust like a blind spot later, then they have not just failed you as a spouse. They have rewritten the meaning of everything you thought you shared. Olivia asked whether I was all right because I had gone quiet. I looked at her over the rim of my coffee mug and said I was just